Get in on the action this season with Underdog's Pick'em game. Select higher or lower between 2 and 8 players and compete for up to 325 times your entry. Use code DIRECTOR when signing up to receive up to $1,000 in bonus cash and a free pick. Yo to Bolt fam, it's the Director. Chargers fans, what do you think, huh? Just came in the mail, the golden jersey. I know there's a lot of feelings, strong feelings around the jersey. I'm looking at you, Pegasus. Pegasus. What do you guys think, though, man? I got to tell you, I borderline hated him before I got my hands on him. But now that I put him on, dude, I got to tell you, I look good. I'm all about that Chargers power. It's growing on me. It really is growing on me. We're going to be wearing it here and there throughout the season. I think the yellow jerseys. We'll see what it looks like on game day, but at least on the Director, we can say we're looking fly. What are we covering today? Well, we got the Chargers versus Broncos preview in a game that, man, guys, I just put a short out on this. I covered the implications of the Chargers maybe winning the AFC West. After this game, it's huge. It's massive. The Chargers going 3-0 in the division. By the way, being 3 games ahead of every division opponent makes them extremely unlikely to catch. So this game is much bigger than a lot of us see on the surface. This game could, in theory, set us up to take the AFC West by season's end. And there's a lot to look forward to it. And, man, I think it's going to be a good matchup. Sean Payton, Jim Harbaugh, great coaches. You got, up-and-coming Oregon quarterback Bo Nix going up against the elite Justin Herbert. It's going to be a fun one, man. So let's unpack this one. Before we do, shout out to the sponsor, Underdog. Use code DIRECTOR. Remember, play just $5. Get $50 in bonus funds. Lots of stuff to look forward to. Make sure you're always checking for those tokens and for those promos when you're going in here. But I got a couple of entries for the Chargers game. This one maybe a little bit more for fun. If you want something a little safer, I think Justin Herbert should still have a pretty good day. And Bo Nix, who only put up 200 versus Indianapolis, I'm going to say let's go lower than that versus the Chargers, who have been awesome. If you guys want something for Sunday, we got some early stuff in here, which I used one of my promo picks for there. It's a great way to support my platform and have some fun along the way. Before we do kick off, hit us up with a like and sub. If you do enjoy this Chargers content, the small amount of time you guys take, hit the like, sub, and bell notification. Help me out a lot. Let's get into it. Lights, camera, action.
Who's got it better than us?
Your Chargers versus Broncos game preview. Man, it's going to be so nice to finally see SoFi Stadium on the broadcast. Jealous of all you guys going to the true home opener of the Bolts. It should be electric. Man, thinking of the hills we've had to climb just to get to this point in the season is staggering. Let's go Chargers. Now let's go ahead and start things off real quick before we get into the meat and potatoes of this game. The injury report, okay? Well, who's playing, who's out? There's a couple of Chargers that'll be out that do hold, significance for what we do on Sunday, including Will Dissly. Now, some of you guys will say, yay, and which, weird. But also, a lot of people want to see Oronde Gadsden play, which I think you probably are going to see something like that this week. More than likely, though, you will see Tucker Fisk, who is our next best run-blocking tight end out there. So Will Dissly, who's one of the best blocking tight ends in football, not being out there, it is significant. And we hope that he comes back sooner rather than later. Outside of that, Cam Hart, Dan Henley, both questionable. Hopefully Dan Henley getting over that flu, man. He pushed through it last week, one of the craziest games I've ever seen by him. Hopefully he's good to go versus the Broncos, because we certainly do need him in this one. Got a little scared from Ladd McConkey on Wednesday, but he's been in full practice since then, so I think he'll be fine. Elijah Molden will also be out in this game, which makes it more likely to see Tony Jefferson out there, who, I mean, honestly, yeah, we're pretty blessed at the position of safety. He would record that interception last week. Looks like a crazy decision by the Chargers, cutting him in the offseason, having him in the practice squad. Luckily, he didn't get poached, and he's back with the Chargers this week. We're hopefully going to see Elijah Molden back sooner rather than later, because he's fantastic in terms of like a flexible, slot option or high safety. Good to see him there. And then finally, Tarheeb Still, full practice for him. As for the Broncos, I'm going to be honest, I haven't taken a huge look at this yet, and it does hold some implications. for this week. Now, full practices across the board, from the top to almost the bottom here, Singleton, Hufanga, Bonito. This is going to be a huge matchup to watch on Sunday. Nick Bonito, the leading pressure edge player in the league, versus Joe Alt, one of the best tackles in all of football right now. That's going to be a fun one to watch. But down here at the bottom, Dre Greenlaw, not going to be in attendance of this one. He is out. And then Evan Ingram, who I'm going to say, guys, I wanted Evan Ingram pretty bad on the Chargers. I drafted him pretty much everywhere in fantasy football, seeing as he was going to be in the Sean Payton system at tight end, which looked pretty good for him. He's not going to play in this one either. So expect a lot of, I forget the backup. Is he up here somewhere? What was his name? The other backup tight end who got the touchdown last week. You're going to see plenty of him. Then Dre Greenlaw also out. So keep that in mind as we get into this one. Now, the first thing I kind of want to start with in this game, previewing the Broncos in particular, is remembering what happened last week. Now, I'm going to say there's two parts to this story. The first part is that the Indianapolis Colts, led by Indiana Jones, maybe the best nickname in football, look to be for real. I mean, I don't know what's going on lately. We've seen these quarterbacks move to different teams and find tremendous success. Geno Smith to the Seahawks recently, not so much with the Raiders. Sam Darnold to the Vikings. Now it feels like Danny Dimes is the next quarterback in line to see a huge boost in his career after a change in scenery. And it's awesome. It's awesome watching him lead this team, who a lot of people wrote off at the top of the season, to such a great start. And one of the teams they've had a great start against has been the Denver Broncos. And this is the reason I'm putting this on here, is because I want to show you guys the vulnerabilities of the Broncos here early, because there's a lot of us, myself included, that jumped into the season thinking, and I still think this in a lot of different ways, that this Broncos defense would be impenetrable, right? They were one of the best, if not the best, team in terms of sacks and generating pressure last season. They just got themselves an insane rookie at DB, who honestly, that defensive back group has already looked insane, led by Pat Surtain. It looked like they were going to be another huge defense to worry about in the AFC West this season. But I don't know about that right now, man. Week 1, they barely survived versus the Tennessee Titans, of course, the bottom-ranked team in the league. Is there a way for us to get up a little bit bigger here? There we go. And then followed by week 2, they would lose to the Indianapolis Colts, who, again, credit to the Colts looking like a reborn team. But also, I mean, we're seeing some cracks in the armor here for the Denver Broncos defense that I certainly want to go over. Not to mention, Bo Nix, who I think he had like under 180 yards week 1 versus Tennessee. I think they ended up barely winning that game, right? And then following up this week with a 206-yard performance. Yes, the 3 touchdowns looked good. I don't think he had much in terms of rushing. 20 yards is not bad. But you're certainly hoping to see a little bit more from Bo Nix so far in the season, which makes me think that the Chargers, who have been very stingy versus any opponent stat, whether it be passing or running or whatever, it's going to be the toughest test so far for Bo Nix this season. So keep that in mind. But the biggest thing I wanted to show in terms of the stats on this game, look at this, man. Daniel Jones, Indiana Jones. We're gonna start burying the Danny Dimes nickname. He's Indiana Jones from now on. 316 yards through the air and a touchdown. Excuse me, what? He only took the 1 sack in that game too. Excuse me, what? And then what's maybe even more shocking is down here, Jonathan Taylor, 165 yards on the ground. He would be the only running back on the ground for the Colts this game, which is also extremely crazy for me to even look at in terms of running the football. Receiving, they had their tight end at 79. The big stat I want to show off here is how many receivers went for 50 or more yards in this week. That's 4, and then you added on another 40 and 20 down here. I mean, it's absolutely insane the success that the Colts had versus the Broncos defense, which is supposed to be one of the best in football. Okay, so with that in mind, let's jump into the meat and potatoes of this game. Some of the things to get excited about. Let's start off with the incredible season we're seeing unfold by Justin Herbert. Already 560 yards and 5 touchdowns on the season through just his first 2 games. You can add another 63 yards on the ground. Rushing, which has been something the Chargers and Greg Roman all of a sudden have been very open to him doing on game day, which I'm absolutely all about. That totals 623 yards for Justin Herbert in his first 2 games of the season. That is absolutely bonkers. You got to remember, Bo Nix on the other side, I think he would barely crack, 300 something, maybe under 400 yards. Yeah, Justin Herbert is on an absolute roll. He would also throw for, and if we're talking about the Broncos in particular, which were also a very good defense last season, for around 250 yards each game versus Denver, which, again, we have to remind everybody, we swept them last season. The Chargers looked really, really good in those games, and we're hoping to see the same thing, led by, of course, Justin Herbert, which, can I just say this, guys, before we move on? It's so refreshing to finally see the world wake up to the potential of Justin Herbert this season. Have you guys noticed that? I mean, a lot of people don't like the spotlight, including Justin Herbert himself. They want to, fly under the radar and attack from the shadows. But I've noticed a lot of love for Justin recently. He's been very consistently listed as a top 5, a lot of the times top 3 quarterback in the league from what I'm seeing. He's constantly in the conversation for MVP in 2025. He's been absolutely fantastic, and it feels like another game where the Chargers may be leaning heavily into his skill set to bring them a victory. And I think especially from what we saw last week with Indiana Jones carving him up, I think Herbert and his weapons have an opportunity to do something very similar. And it's because, again, something that we pointed out in the stats from last week for the Colts, the weapon situation for the Chargers looking so vastly improved. Indiana Jones last week, like we stated, produced 4 different receivers with 50 or more yards. Again, a total of 316 yards. Crazy times we're living in, right? But this really looks good for the Chargers this week. As Chargers fans can tell you, Justin Herbert loves spreading the ball around. Some of the best seasons we saw behind Phillip Rivers as well is when he had enough help to spread the ball around wherever he could. And this year it feels like that is the case. The Bolts have 3 different receivers with over 120 yards each. I think Quentin Johnston is pushing somewhere at like 140 or 150 yards already this season over the first 2 games. That is awesome. You take a look at Ladd and Keenan Allen. Both of them are really keeping pace with each other. 12 receptions for Keenan, 11 for Ladd. They're both around 120 yards, which is pretty insane. And it just shows how hard the Chargers offense has been to stop through the air because of the skill set of, I'm going to say, those 2 receivers in particular. It feels like every third down, we see them either lining up next to each other or somebody's in the slot or both of them are on the slot on each side. Like, they are becoming a staple for the Chargers to keep drives alive, and for the most part, we're seeing it work beautifully. The fact that Daniel Jones was able to continue very many drives last week, I think there was a stat floating around out there that there was little if no punting in that game for the Colts either, which is awesome. Again, that spells very good for the Chargers this week. It feels like it's going to be another one of those games with now Justin Herbert spreading the ball around to Ladd, Keenan, QJ. We saw a little bit of Trey Harris last week, which was awesome. Do we see a little bit more of KLS and Darius Davis? It's absolutely possible. But the guys I do expect to see a little bit more involved this week are the tight ends. The Broncos have allowed 122 yards to the position so far this season. And yes, Will Dissly's not going to be out there. And like I alluded to at the top with the injury report, a lot of people excited to maybe see Oronde Gadsden activated this game. I will say it's a possibility, but more than likely, if you're looking for a replacement for Will Dissly this game, it's going to be Tucker Fisk, who is one of the best, run blocking tight ends on the team. He's exceptional too. Like, throughout the league, he's very good. Maybe not anywhere close to as good of a receiver as Will Dissly, but he's a very, very good blocker. So I would expect him to be elevated for this one. But it is possible. I'm going to say Oronde Gadsden, who has played a good amount of receiver at some points. So you've seen him line up in the slot, sometimes outside. Maybe they decide to go with him over KLS, who's been struggling a little bit recently, just to see if they have another point of attack with a receiving tight end to line up with Conklin. I don't know. That one could be interesting. You guys let me know what you're thinking there. Next up, the run game. Now, this is something that Chargers fans have been very worried about to start the season with, I'm going to say, good reason, but it's not, I'm thinking, entirely because of the lack of efficiency. I mean, it could be better, but it's definitely not as bad as we're thinking. I think the Chargers, for the most part, in the first 2 weeks, have used the run game mainly as a distraction, right? It's a bluff, and both teams have really leaned into that bluff in terms of our opponents so far this season. It feels like we threw off the Chiefs completely. We threw it all over the field with Justin Herbert, which ultimately led to that win in week 1. And the same thing can be said week 2 versus the Raiders. Yes, we saw some good run moments in that game, but mostly it was Justin Herbert. And I wonder how long that bluff is going to continue working. Does it go into the Broncos game as another point of success? It could, but this also seems like a good opportunity for the Chargers to pivot just a little bit, right? I think ultimately you want Herbert and his skill set to win you this game, but we have to remember the Broncos are a team that the Chargers saw a lot of success with last season running the football against. Dobbins in 2024 ran for, in their first contest against Denver, he had 96 yards and a touchdown in that game. Don't ask me the receiving yards. I'm sure there was some tacked on top there for J.K. Dobbins. Great game for him. Of course, a new member of the Denver Broncos now. And in their second meeting, the Chargers would feature Gus Edwards in that game. I think J.K. was banged up at that point of the season, but they still produced 68 yards and 2 touchdowns just with Gus Edwards. I'm sure there was other contributing running backs in that game as well, which just goes to show that the Broncos are not immune to a rushing attack, taking them down. Not to mention as well, what we saw last week with the Colts, freaking Jonathan Taylor ran for 165 yards on him, folks. That is massive. You guys want to know who Omarion Hampton's closest comp was in the offseason when we were looking at him in the draft and some guys to compare him to in terms of his physical attributes and maybe some potential there? It was Jonathan Taylor. Just to throw that out there for y'all. I don't know what it means. It probably means nothing, but it is pretty crazy to see Jonathan Taylor absolutely decimate them for 165 yards on the ground last week, and then his comp, or I should say his NFL runner-up, or whatever you want to call it, coming in the next week to have an opportunity at that as well. By the way, Taylor last week also put up, 50 yards and a touchdown through the air as well, which we know Omarion Hampton can also be a threat. I'm also going to throw Najee Harris in there. Najee Harris. Excuse me, guys. A little under the weather. As threats in terms of receiving from the running back position, too. So, I don't know. I think this week there is a good possibility, based on the history of the Chargers, in particular, running over the Broncos on the ground, and then, of course, what Jonathan Taylor was able to accomplish last week. Don't write off Omarion Hampton this game. I think a lot of people panicking on Hampton, especially fantasy football managers. Y'all are hitting my DMs and my my messages all the time. Like, what should I do? Should I trade him and this and that? My answer has been pretty universal to that. It's weight, right? The Chargers are in too good of a position for a running back not to succeed, especially the one to the skill set of Omarion Hampton in the long term. But again, it feels like the run game has been more or less a bluff for this team so far. This sneakily could be a good opportunity for Hampton to have his breakout game. But if you guys are wanting to sit him and wait, that's totally fine. I think the Hampton days are coming. I think by mid-season, many of us will be very excited that we drafted Hampton in our fantasy league. So watch out for Hampton in this game. Finally, a couple of things to address on the Broncos side of the field. Bo Nix who, again, a lot of people had a lot of expectations for coming into this season. Fantasy football, something I follow very closely. He was one of those guys that everyone's like, yeah, wait until the later rounds. Get Bo Nix. He's going to be, a great budget quarterback. Broncos fans very excited about it. NFL heads and podcasts, everybody expecting a big year two from Bo Nix, which could certainly still happen, right? We've all seen a number 10 come out of Oregon and blow up the league despite a lot of criticism. But I don't know if it started the way Broncos fans have hoped so far. Already 3 interceptions on the season. Like we saw, he threw for 200 yards last week versus the Colts. Just 176 yards in week 1 versus the Tennessee Titans, which, again, not a great-looking team in Tennessee right now. It doesn't look good for Bo Nix, at least to start, right? And those first 2 defenses that he faced up against are not particularly great, right? We have to wait and see what's going on with the Colts. They've been the surprise of the season, but Tennessee is not a defense where I'm thinking you should be held under 200 yards. Of course, I think they ran pretty well that game, so maybe it wasn't as needed for Bo Nix to go out there and put up a 250 game. But this week's going to be a much different story. The Broncos are going to have to throw the football, right? The Chargers are proving to be very dangerous in terms of their offense, and they're going to need their quarterback to step up and try and keep pace with Justin Herbert. Chargers defense is not going to make it easy either. This is going to be the toughest game for Bo Nix so far this season. The Chargers defense held, Patrick Mahomes to 250 yards, right? It was like 258. QB rating of just 82. And that's Patrick Mahomes, right? The next week, we would hold Geno Smith to 180 yards. And a lot of people thought I was crazy when I was posting some of my Underdog entries saying that he would have less than, I think it was like 250 yards or something like that, because he had just dropped 362 yards on New England the week before. Geno Smith looks like he was going to have another big day versus the Chargers. No, we dropped him to under 180 yards that week. That just shows me that the Chargers defense is officially back. Like, rather, this back-to-back seasons of dominance from the Chargers defense feels very real. And I don't know what success you're going to see from Bo Nix this week, which is why, you see stuff like an Underdog. I'm going to take him under 229, considering he wasn't able to surpass that versus Tennessee or Indianapolis. I just don't see it happening versus the Chargers this week. It's going to be a tough game for Bo. What about the run game, right? J.K. Dobbins is returning. We saw a fun little story about him and the Chargers trying to get him back this offseason. Yes, I think it's been confirmed that the Bolts wanted to get him back. They were already talking to Najee Harris at the time. They didn't meet eye to eye in terms of Dobbins and the Bolts, in terms of the contract and all that kind of stuff. So it ended up falling through. And now we get to see a potential revenge game for J.K. in this week. And J.K. Dobbins has been fine, right? He's got 139 yards on the season so far. He looks really good. Okay, we know, Chargers fans, we know that J.K. Dobbins is not one to take lightly. However, I will say that the Chargers are allowing just 83 yards per game on the ground, which, again, is going to be a tough ask of even J.K. Dobbins this week. What about their rookie and R.J. Harvey? Man, I was so high on him in the offseason. I think he, again, all the rookies for the most part in terms of running back, which, again, this was an exceptional running back group. There's a bit of a wait-and-see mentality that we're all going to need to have with them, especially if you're playing fantasy. But he had a good week 1, 70 yards on the ground, right? He looked pretty good. He got bottled up versus the Colts. So I'm not going to say the Broncos running back situation is bad. I'm going to say it's pretty good. But that being the case, they're going to have a pretty big performance this week, considering the Chargers have been a very good team at limiting rushing yards this season. They're one of the top teams in limiting opponents on the ground this season. A couple other things to keep notice of. The Broncos receivers, they look very good this season, too, despite the lack of big play from Bo Nix. We saw a pretty big game from Troy Franklin last week. Cortland Sutton's also a guy that you got to keep an eye on out there. But again, the Chargers defense, which we'll close out the video with, has looked absolutely insane in almost every single stat. that involves what the Broncos are going to throw at you. Yards per game, the Chargers are at just 282, which is 7th in football. Points allowed per game, just 15, which is 3rd in the NFL right now. This team, who last season looked completely reborn behind Jesse Minter, looks very similar so far to what they were. And you got to remember the offenses we faced so far. Yes, the Raiders, maybe not the craziest offense, but they looked really good versus New England. And then the Chiefs, of course. So this isn't a facade. This is a for real defense. We got, Pro Bowlers looking like they're all over the roster. Dayan Henley looked like a Pro Bowler to start the year. Derwin James is leading a very punishing defensive back group so far. I mean, it is a nasty, nasty defense that Denver's about to face. Again, this time at SoFi, which is pretty cool. If you were to ask me, Director, what's criticism you have for the Chargers this week, I would say that, or for the defense, I would say that we got to generate more pressure. Feels like that's a work in progress. Of course, we don't have Khalil Mack for the next 4 or so weeks as he's been put on IR. By the way, we're so blessed that Khalil Mack is going to be back at some point this season, man. I thought he was donezo. That was a very ugly-looking injury. But, of course, the good news, it feels like he's going to be back at some point this season. Hopefully in the next, 4 or 5 weeks, which would be awesome. But this week in particular, we have to keep an eye on some of the guys that are going to step into his role. Of course, Thule, who's had a soft start to the season. We could see a little bit more. You got Bud Dupree. Those are going to be your primary 2 guys. Who's going to be rotating in now, right? It's going to be maybe Kyle Kennard. The Chargers just signed Clelin Ferrell and Rashad Weaver. Do they elevate one of them to the roster? Caleb Murphy, the standout from preseason, could see plenty of snaps this week too. Who knows? But that would be the one thing where I'm hoping the Chargers find a little more success this week than they have so far at the start of the season. With that being said, my score prediction for this one, I do have the Chargers taking the lead, or I should say taking the lead early and taking the dub. Ultimately, 23 points for the Chargers to 17 of the Broncos. I think it's going to be closer than a lot of us realize. I think the Broncos are more competent, maybe the second most competent team in this division, depending on who you ask. I still think it's the Chiefs. But they are one to pay attention to. And I still think the Chargers are going to find a way to win this game because, again, the implications here are absolutely massive. If the Chargers were to go 3-0 in the division with no other wins within the division, again, there's no other team that's won a division game in the AFC West, that would make us almost impossible to catch in the AFC West, and it would put the Chargers at a percentage chance of taking the division at very, very high. As of right now, the Chargers at 2-0, I actually have the stat written down right here, are sitting at a 58.5% chance to take the AFC West. If they were to go at 3-0 after this week, I have to imagine that statistic would multiply. Like, that would be so crazy. The first time the Chargers have been favored to take the AFC West since 2009. 16 years, folks. So this is a pretty big matchup, one that I'm excited to see the Chargers attack head on. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining me. This has been The Director. We'll see you on Sunday, bright and early, to watch the Chargers. Or maybe not bright and early, but you know what I mean for me. To watch the Chargers take on the Denver Broncos in what could be a significant game to the Chargers' odds of taking the division, hitting the postseason, and becoming one of the more dangerous threats within the league in 2025. Guys, thank you again. We'll catch you next time. As always, bolt up and stay frosty.